The courtroom was cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from air conditioning, no. This was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones when you know everyone in the room is waiting for you to break. Elena Vasquez stood near the entrance of courtroom 7B, her fingers trembling against the manila folder in her hands. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, no designer bag, just a woman standing at the edge of everything she had left. And across the room, Marcus Dean Whitfield, her ex-husband, sitting at the defendant's table like he owned the building. Tailored navy suit, gold cufflinks, catching the fluorescent light. A legal team of 4 men in matching charcoal ties, flanking him like soldiers. He leaned back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the backrest, whispering something to his lead attorney. Then he saw her, and he smirked. Not a subtle smile, not a polite nod, a full, teeth showing, disgustingly confident smirk, the kind of expression that says, "You really thought you could fight me?" Elena's stomach dropped. She could feel the eyes of every person in that courtroom sliding toward her. The clerk, the bailiff, the gallery of curious strangers who had come to watch this divorce and custody spectacle unfold like daytime television. She was alone. No attorney, no family behind her, just Elena and the echoes of 3 years of emotional warfare. But here's the thing, this story isn't really about Marcus and his smirk. No, this story is about what happened 7 minutes into that hearing, when the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, when every head turned, when the clicking of Italian leather shoes echoed down the aisle like a heartbeat. A man walked in, tall, commanding, the kind of presence that doesn't ask for attention, it demands it. He adjusted the cuff of his midnight black Tom Ford suit, and without a single word, he walked straight to Elena's side. The judge paused. Marcus's smirk disappeared. His attorney dropped his pen, and this man, this absolute stranger to everyone in that room, looked directly at the judge and said 5 words that turned the entire case upside down. "That woman is my wife." Now, if you want to understand how we got here, how a woman with nothing became the wife of one of the most powerful men in the country, you need to hear the whole story. And trust me, you are not ready for what comes next. Let's rewind 3 years before that courtroom, 3 years before that smirk, 3 years before those 5 words changed everything. Elena Vasquez was 26 years old, working double shifts as a night shift nurse at St. Mercy Hospital in downtown Chicago. She was beautiful, not the kind of beautiful that gets magazine covers, but the kind that makes you look twice. Warm brown eyes, a quiet strength in the way she carried herself, the kind of woman who could calm a screaming child with just a whisper. She met Marcus Whitfield at a charity gala she had no business being at. Her friend Priya had dragged her along. Marcus was the golden boy, heir to Whitfield and Crane, a mid-tier commercial real estate firm his father had built from the ground up. Charming, eloquent, the kind of man who knew how to make a woman feel like the only person in a room full of hundreds. They dated for 5 months, got married in 8, and that's when the mask fell off. It started small, little comments about her clothes, about how she didn't quite fit in at his business dinners. He'd correct her grammar in front of his colleagues, laugh when she mispronounced a wine name. She'd smile through it, swallow the sting, because she loved him, because she believed marriage was about patience. Then came the isolation. He convinced her to quit nursing, said he'd take care of everything. He moved her into his penthouse on Lake Shore Drive and slowly, methodically, cut her off from everyone she knew. No more Priya, no more Sunday calls with her mother, no more life outside Marcus. And then came Vanessa Blake, a junior associate at his firm, 23, blonde, Instagram verified. Elena found the messages on a Tuesday night while Marcus was in the shower. Not just flirtation, explicit, photos, plans, date locations Elena recognized because she had eaten at those same restaurants with him. When she confronted him, he didn't apologize. He didn't even flinch. He looked her dead in the eye and said, and I will never forget this line, "You should be grateful I even married you. You were nothing before me, and you'll be nothing after." The divorce was brutal. Marcus had a legal team. Elena had a legal aid attorney who was juggling 47 other cases. Marcus claimed she was emotionally unstable, brought in a psychologist, one who had never even met Elena, to testify that she was unfit to manage finances. The court awarded Marcus primary custody of their 2-year-old daughter, Lily. Elena got supervised visitation twice a month. No spousal support, no property, just a suitcase, and whatever dignity she could scrape off the courtroom floor. She stood outside the courthouse that day in January, snow falling on her shoulders, holding a photograph of Lily in a cracked phone screen, and she made herself a promise. I will come back for you. I will come back stronger. She moved into a studio apartment above a laundromat in Pilsen. The ceiling leaked when it rained. The heater worked only when it wanted to. She took a job waitressing at a 24-hour diner, pouring coffee and cleaning tables until 2 in the morning. And every single night, before she went to sleep on that thin mattress, she opened a notebook and she wrote business plans, ideas, things she'd overheard from Marcus's meeting, strategies she'd absorbed without even realizing during those years, trapped inside his world. She didn't know it then, but those years of silent observation, they were about to become her greatest weapon. Because across the city, in a glass tower overlooking the Chicago River, a man named Dominic Aurelius Cavallone was about to have the worst day of his life. And Elena Vasquez, this broken, discarded, underestimated woman, was about to walk right into the middle of it. But that part of the story, that's where everything changes. And I promise you what she did next, no one, not Marcus, not the courts, not a single person who had ever looked down on her, saw it coming. Dominic Cavallone was not your typical billionaire. He didn't come from generational wealth. He didn't inherit a company or a trust fund. Dominic grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Cicero, the son of a Sicilian immigrant who repaired shoes for a living and a mother who cleaned office buildings at night. By 20, he dropped out of college to build a logistics software company out of a rented garage. By 28, that company, Cavallone Systems International, was processing supply chain data for 3 of the top 10 Fortune 500 companies. By 34, Dominic was worth $4.2 billion. Forbes called him the invisible titan because despite his wealth, he lived quietly. No yachts, no tabloid appearances, just work, black coffee, and an ironclad code of respect for people who earned their place in the world. But Dominic had a problem, a personal one. His mother, Rosa Cavallone, had been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. She was 71. The finest specialists in Chicago couldn't slow the progression. Dominic, a man who could buy anything in the world, was watching the one person who mattered most to him disappear. One evening, at 10:47 p.m., Dominic sat in the waiting room of St. Mercy Hospital's neurology wing. Rosa had been admitted after a fall. He was alone, exhausted, his head in his hands, and a woman in worn-out sneakers and a diner uniform walked in, carrying a tray of coffees for the nursing staff. Elena. She noticed him sitting there. She didn't know who he was. She saw a tired man with red eyes and offered him a coffee. You look like you need this more than they do, she said softly. He took it. They talked. Not about business, not about money, about mothers, about loss, about what it feels like when the world takes something from you and doesn't even bother to explain why. She visited Rosa twice that week, not because anyone asked her to, not because she was paid, but because she remembered what it felt like to be forgotten in a hospital room, and she refused to let that happen to someone else's mother. Dominic noticed, and something inside him, something that had been locked away behind years of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, began to crack open. Over the next 4 months, a quiet friendship formed. Elena never asked Dominic for money. She never even Googled him. She didn't know about the Forbes lists. She didn't know about the private jet. She knew a man named Dom who loved his mother and drank his coffee black. Meanwhile, Elena was building something of her own. That notebook she wrote in every night, it had turned into a real business plan, a concierge healthcare navigation service for low-income patients, helping people understand their insurance, find specialists, access resources. She called it Bridge Care. She pitched it to a small business incubator on the South Side. They gave her a desk, a laptop, and 12 weeks. Elena worked 18-hour days. She coded the basic website herself using free YouTube tutorials. She cold-called clinics. She knocked on doors. She built Bridge Care from nothing, fueled by every ounce of pain Marcus had put her through. When Dominic found out about Bridge Care, not because Elena told him, but because one of his investment analysts flagged it as an emerging disruptor in patient advocacy tech, He didn't offer her money. He offered something better. He offered her a meeting with his head of operations and his chief technology officer. I don't invest in pity, Dominic told her. I invest in people who refuse to quit. And you, Elena, you are the most relentless person I have ever met. Bridgecare received a $2.5 million seed investment, not as charity, as business. And within 14 months, it was operating in 11 cities. Somewhere in that process, between hospital visits with Rosa, late-night strategy calls, and arguments about user interface design, Dominic and Elena fell in love. Quietly, slowly, the way real love happens when two broken people finally find someone who understands their fracture. They married in a private ceremony on the shores of Lake Michigan. 12 guests. No press. No photographer. Just two people who had chosen each other not because of what they had, but because of who they were. Elena didn't take his last name publicly. She didn't move into his penthouse. She kept her studio apartment. She kept waitressing 2 shifts a week at the diner because, in her words, I never want to forget where I started. And Marcus? Marcus had no idea. None. He still thought Elena was the broken woman he had thrown away, like yesterday's newspaper. He was about to find out just how catastrophically wrong he was. Because a court date was coming. And this time, Elena wasn't walking in alone. 6 months after Bridgecare launched in its 11th city, Elena filed a motion with the Cook County Family Court. The request was simple, a modification of custody. She wanted joint custody of Lily, equal time, shared decision-making. Her attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Irene Matsuda, hired and fully funded through Elena's own company earnings, filed the petition with surgical precision. Financial records, character references from educators, pediatricians, and community leaders. A 62-page brief that documented everything Marcus had done to manipulate the original ruling. Marcus received the filing on a Thursday afternoon. His reaction? He laughed, literally laughed. He called his attorney Richard Holm and said, and this was entered into phone records later, "She's back? Seriously? Let her embarrass herself. This will take 20 minutes. He didn't bother to review the brief. He didn't prepare counter documents. He walked into that courtroom like he was walking into brunch, relaxed, amused, already victorious in his own mind. The hearing was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. on a Wednesday. Courtroom 7B Judge Patricia Harmon presiding, a no-nonsense, 30-year veteran of family law who had seen every kind of manipulation the wealthy could dream up. The gallery was unusually full, not because of Marcus or Elena, but because word had spread through legal circles that this case was going to be interesting. A few journalists sat in the back row. 2 family law professors from Northwestern had come to observe. Elena arrived at 9:15. She walked in quietly, black dress, hair pulled back, no entourage. She sat at the petitioner's table, opened her folder, and waited. Marcus arrived at 9:28, 2 minutes before the hearing, flanked by his legal team of 4. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Elena's first 3 months of rent in Pilsen. He sat down, adjusted his cufflinks, and immediately began scanning the room, looking for weakness, looking for advantage. And when he saw Elena sitting there, alone, composed, no visible legal army behind her, that smirk returned. The same smirk from their first divorce hearing. The same smirk that said, "You don't belong here." He leaned over to Richard Holm and whispered something. Holm chuckled. The paralegal behind them smirked too. Elena saw it, all of it. She felt the heat rise in her chest, the old familiar sting of humiliation trying to claw its way back. But she didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Because she knew something they didn't. She knew what was about to walk through that door. Judge Harmon entered. The bailiff called the court to order. The clerk read the case number, and the hearing officially began. Marcus's attorney stood first, smiling like a man who had already won. He began his opening statement with a line that would age very, very poorly. "Your Honor, I believe we can resolve this quickly. My client's position has not changed. The petitioner lacks the resources and stability to." And that's when the doors opened. Heavy oak, slow swing, every head turned, and the man who walked in changed everything. Now, before we get to the reveal, because I know you're on the edge of your seat, let me tell you what happened in the 6 minutes before those doors opened. Because Marcus used those 6 minutes to do what Marcus does best: humiliate. The moment his attorney finished the opening statement, Marcus himself asked to address the court. Judge Harmon allowed it, reluctantly. Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket, And with the calm confidence of a man who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered, he spoke. Your Honor, I don't want to waste the court's time. My ex-wife is a wonderful person, truly. But let's be honest about what we're looking at here. He paused. Let the words hang. When we divorced, Elena had no job, no savings, no support system. I gave her every opportunity during our marriage, and she chose not to grow. I don't say that with malice. I say it with sadness. Elena's jaw tightened. Her attorney placed a hand on her arm. Marcus continued. She's now asking for joint custody of our daughter. A daughter who lives in a safe home, attends a top-tier preschool, and has every advantage a child could need. I have to ask, respectfully, what has changed? What can she possibly offer Lily that she couldn't offer before? He turned slightly toward Elena, and then he said it, the line that would haunt him for the rest of his public life. Your Honor, look at her. She's sitting there alone. No resources, no representation, beyond a single attorney. This isn't a custody petition. This is desperation, wearing a black dress. A murmur rippled through the gallery. One of the journalists scribbled furiously. Judge Harmon's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. She was letting the record build. Elena's hands were shaking beneath the table, not from fear, from fury. From every night she had cried into a pillow in that leaking apartment. From every supervised visit where she had to say goodbye to Lily after just 90 minutes. From every time this man had made her feel like she was less than human. She wanted to scream. She wanted to stand up and tell this courtroom everything. The cheating, the gaslighting, the financial strangling, all of it. But she didn't. She breathed, slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth, because she knew that the best revenge is not a scream. It's a silence that precedes thunder. And the thunder? It was already walking down the hallway, Italian leather shoes clicking on marble floors, a security detail of 2 men in dark suits trailing behind, a phone call ending with 3 words, I'm here now. The bailiff glanced at the door. The clerk looked up from her notes, and the heavy oak doors of courtroom 7B began to open. What happened next? No one in that room, no one, was prepared for it. The doors didn't just open, they swung wide, catching the fluorescent light and casting long shadows down the center aisle. Every head turned, every whisper stopped. The courtroom held its breath, like the whole building had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. Dominic Aurelius Cavallone walked in, 6'2", square jaw, dark eyes that carried the weight of a man who had built empires and buried betrayals. He wore a midnight black Tom Ford suit, tailored so precisely it looked like it had been stitched onto his frame by angels with engineering degrees. His watch, a Patek Philippe Sky Moon tourbillon, caught the light as he adjusted his cuff. It was worth more than Marcus's entire legal team would earn that year, combined. He didn't rush. He didn't scan the room nervously. He walked with the measured, deliberate pace of a man who had entered 1,000 rooms and owned most of them. 2 security personnel remained at the door, silent, hands clasped. He walked directly to Elena's table. He didn't look at Marcus, not once. He placed one hand gently on Elena's shoulder, a touch so soft, so intimate, that the entire gallery felt like they were intruding on something private. Elena looked up at him, and for the first time that morning, she smiled. Judge Harmon leaned forward. Sir, this is a closed family hearing. Identify yourself and your purpose in this courtroom. Dominic turned to face the bench. His voice was low, calm, the kind of calm that doesn't need volume because it carries the gravity of absolute certainty. Your Honor, my name is Dominic Aurelius Cavallone. I am the founder and chairman of Cavallone Systems International. A gasp from the gallery. One of the Northwestern professors grabbed his colleague's arm. The journalist in the back row dropped her pen. Dominic continued. I'm here because the petitioner, Elena Vasquez, is my wife. Silence. Complete, deafening, suffocating silence. Marcus's face, that smug, sculpted, self-satisfied face, went white, not pale, white. The blood drained from his cheeks, like someone had pulled a plug. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His attorney, Richard Holm, turned to him with wide eyes, searching for an explanation that didn't exist. Judge Harmon removed her glasses. Your wife? Yes, Your Honor. We were married 5 months ago in a private ceremony. I'm here today to support her petition for joint custody of her daughter Lily Whitfield, and to provide the court with any information it may find relevant regarding Elena's character, resources, and fitness as a mother. He reached into his jacket and produced a slim leather portfolio. He placed it on the table. Inside, you'll find our marriage certificate, notarized financial disclosures, and a signed letter from Dr. Angela Morrison, the head of pediatric psychiatry at Lurie Children's Hospital, attesting to Elena's exceptional parenting during every visitation she's been allowed. Elena's attorney, Irene Matsuda, stood and addressed the bench. Your Honor, I'd also like to enter into evidence the petitioner's full financial disclosures as CEO of Bridgecare Health Solutions, a company currently operating in 11 cities, serving over 40,000 patients, and valued at approximately $38 million. Another gasp. Louder this time. Marcus turned to Holm. That's not possible. She was a waitress. She was. Mr. Whitfield, Judge Harmon's voice cut through the room like a gavel strike. You will not speak unless addressed. Continue, Miss Matsuda. Irene was masterful. She walked the court through everything. The original divorce, the manipulated custody ruling, the psychological evaluation conducted by a Dr. Marcus had personally retained, a doctor who, it turned out, had never been licensed to practice in Illinois. She presented phone records, financial records, text messages in which Marcus had explicitly stated his intention to bury Elena in legal fees until she gave up. Every exhibit was like a brick, and with each one, the wall Marcus had built around himself crumbled a little more. But the moment, the real moment, came when Judge Harmon asked Dominic a direct question. Mr. Cavallone, in your own words, why are you here today? Dominic stood. He looked at the judge. Then he looked at Elena, and when he spoke, his voice cracked, just slightly, just enough to let the entire courtroom feel what was underneath the suit and the billions. Your Honor, I've built companies. I've closed deals worth more than some countries' GDP, but I have never, not once in my life, met anyone as strong as this woman. He paused. His jaw tightened. Elena didn't marry me for my money. She didn't even know who I was when we met. She offered me a cup of coffee in a hospital waiting room when my mother was dying. She held my mother's hand. She read to her. She sang to her in Spanish because my mother loved the sound of it, even when she couldn't remember her own name. A woman in the gallery wiped her eyes. The court reporter's fingers hovered motionless above the keys. Marcus Whitfield took everything from her. Her home, her confidence, her daughter. And he did it not because she was unfit, but because he could. Because the system let him. Because money talks louder than truth in rooms like this. He looked directly at Marcus now, for the first time, and his gaze was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was pity. You called her nothing. You said she had no resources, no representation. Dominic's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You looked at this woman, a woman who built a healthcare company from a notebook and a broken phone, and you saw nothing. That tells this court everything it needs to know. Not about her, about you. The courtroom was silent for 7 full seconds. No one moved. Judge Harmon spoke. I've seen enough. I'm ordering a full review of the original custody determination. I'm appointing an independent guardian ad litem for the minor child. And Mr. Whitfield, she turned to Marcus. I strongly suggest you retain counsel who has actually read the opposing brief, because from what I've seen today, your team came to a sword fight with a butter knife. Marcus's lead attorney tried to object. Your Honor, we weren't given notice of. You were given a 62-page brief, Mr. Holm. You chose not to read it. That is not the court's problem. She slammed the gavel. We're adjourned. I'll issue a temporary order by end of week granting the petitioner expanded visitation pending full review. Elena's hands were trembling. Dominic took her hand under the table. She looked at him, tears running down her face. Not tears of sadness, tears of justice. As they stood to leave, Marcus, for the first time in perhaps his entire adult life, was speechless. He stood at his table, frozen. His legal team was already packing up, avoiding eye contact. His paralegal had her phone out, likely already drafting a damage control email. And as Elena walked past him, head high, shoulders back, her husband's hand resting gently on the small of her back, she paused. Just for a moment. She didn't yell. She didn't gloat. She looked at Marcus and said, softly, you were right about one thing, Marcus. I was nothing before you. She paused. But I became everything after. And she walked out of that courtroom. Into the sunlight. Into the rest of her life. Within 72 hours, the fallout began. Judge Harmon's temporary order granted Elena 3 full weekends per month with Lily, unsupervised. Within 2 weeks, the independent guardian ad litem, a woman named Dr. Sharon Tillman, conducted interviews with both parents, visited both homes, and spoke with Lily's preschool teachers. Her report was damning for Marcus. Not because his home was unsafe, but because Lily, in her own 3-year-old words, said something that broke Elena's heart and sealed Marcus's fate. When Dr. Tillman asked Lily, "What do you like to do with Daddy?" the little girl said, "I don't know. He's always on his phone. Nanny reads me stories." When she asked, "What do you like to do with Mommy?" Lily smiled and said, "Mommy sings. Mommy makes pancakes funny. Mommy stays." That word, stays, appeared 3 times in the Guardian's report, underlined. The full custody review took 4 months. In the end, the court reversed the original order entirely. Elena was awarded primary physical custody. Marcus received alternating weekends and Wednesday evening, supervised, pending completion of a co-parenting course. But the legal consequences were only the beginning. Remember that unlicensed psychologist Marcus had used in the original divorce? His name was Dr. Gerald Fenton. It turned out Fenton had been providing fraudulent expert testimony in family courts across 3 states. When Irene Matsuda's investigation uncovered his fake credentials, she didn't just report it to the Illinois State Board. She filed a formal complaint with the Cook County State's attorney. Marcus was named as a co-conspirator in the fraud, not criminally charged, but named. The investigation made the front page of the Chicago Tribune. The headline read, "Real estate heir linked to fraudulent custody testimony." Whitfield and Crane's stock dropped 14% in 2 weeks. 3 major commercial tenants pulled out of lease negotiation. Marcus's father, the company founder, issued a public statement distancing himself from his son's personal matters. Marcus tried to countersue. He filed motions for defamation, invasion of privacy, and emotional distress against Elena, against Irene, even against the Tribune. Every single motion was dismissed. Every one. His social circle evaporated. The country club he'd been a member of since college quietly revoked his membership. His mistress, Vanessa Blake, left him, not out of moral awakening, but because his name was now toxic and her Instagram brand couldn't afford the association. Meanwhile, Elena's story began to spread. Not because she sought fame, she didn't give a single interview, but because people talk. Court filings are public. And in the age of social media, a story about a discarded wife who built a healthcare empire and married a billionaire while her arrogant ex-husband crumbled under the weight of his own ego, that story tells itself. BridgeCare's website traffic increased 900% in 1 month. Elena received partnership inquiries from hospital systems in 14 states. Dominic's venture capital firm allocated an additional $12 million in Series A funding. And Lily? Lily moved into Elena's new home, a modest 4-bedroom brownstone in Lincoln Park that Elena bought with her own money. Not Dominic's, hers. It had a backyard with a swing set and a garden where Lily planted sunflowers every Saturday morning. Dominic would visit on weekends. He never tried to replace Marcus as Lily's father. He simply showed up, read her books, made pancakes badly by Elena's account, but Lily loved them anyway. And Rosa, Dominic's mother, despite the Alzheimer's, despite the fog that clouded her memory more each month, recognized Elena every single time she walked into the room. Every single time. Some bonds, it turns out, go deeper than memory. But this story isn't over yet, because what happened 6 months later, the final chapter in this saga, proves something that Marcus and people like Marcus will never understand. 6 months after the custody reversal, Elena stood on a stage in Washington, D.C. Not a courtroom, not a diner, the main stage of the National Healthcare Innovation Summit. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse. Simple, elegant, her hair was down. And in the front row sat Dominic, holding Lily on his lap. Lily was wearing a tiny version of her mother's blazer, because she had insisted on matching. Elena spoke for 11 minutes. She didn't talk about Marcus. She didn't talk about revenge. She talked about BridgeCare, about the 63,000 patients the platform had served, about the single mothers navigating cancer diagnoses alone, about the elderly veterans who couldn't understand their Medicare paperwork, about the people the system forgets. And then she said something that the audience would remember long after the conference ended. "I was once told I was nothing. that I had no resources, no value, no place at the table. And for a while, I believed it. I let someone else's voice become my truth. She paused, looked at Lily. But here's what I've learned. The people who tell you that you're nothing, they're not describing you. They're describing their fear of what you'll become when you stop believing them. The room stood, every single person. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. Is there a Marcus in your life? Someone who told you that you weren't enough, that you didn't belong, that you were too broken, too poor, too ordinary to matter? Because Elena's story isn't fiction. It's a mirror. It's a reminder that your lowest moment is not your final chapter, that the people who discard you do not get to define you. That power, real power, doesn't come from a last name, a bank account, or a courtroom smirk. It comes from refusing to stay down. If this story moved you, if you felt something watching Elena walk back into that courtroom, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me, for the algorithm. So this story reaches the woman who needs to hear it tonight. The one sitting in her car in a parking lot, wondering if she should go back inside. The one who thinks no one is coming to save her. Tell her what Elena learned. You don't need someone to save you. You just need to survive long enough to save yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who's fighting, and leave a comment. Tell me your story. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next